This is a Massey Ferguson 450S excavator. It's made by NZG and it's in 1/50th scale. Now, this is a fascinating model. Where to start? Massey Ferguson is primarily an agricultural equipment manufacturer, and that's probably the best thing for them to be. They've made a couple different machines in an attempt to break into the construction market, and none of them really did particularly well. I believe their backhoes were the only machines that they made themselves, and they literally just took their utility tractors and stuck a loader on the front and a backhoe on the back and called it good. And don't get me wrong, their tractors are very reliable. However, when you compare them to, at the time, Ford and Case and John Deere and even Caterpillar and JCB for that matter, they just weren't as good as what the competition had. And they tried, they made a good effort, but just wasn't meant to be, and eventually they discontinued it. They had skid loaders also. They had small dozers and track loaders, which I think were made by Hanomag. I'm not 100% on that. And they have this excavator. Now, I don't believe that Massey Ferguson made this excavator. I'm pretty sure it's a rebranded machine, but I don't know what it actually is. And this is kind of interesting because it has just some peculiar features to it. The first thing that stands out is the motor being mounted sideways. At the time, this would have been a pretty big innovation, especially considering that originally on an awful lot of excavators, the motors were mounted inline, and then they changed them sideways because that it adds more counterweight to the back of the machine. And that's why that's the way it is on almost every excavator now, just because it makes sense. So it's interesting, given the time that this would have been produced, that it has that motor set up that way. The motor and pumps and everything else. So that's pretty interesting. That's a pretty good innovation for, a more or less one and done excavator. So that's just interesting. Another thing that's peculiar is if you look at these drive motors and this massive, I don't know if that's a, housing for the drive motors. I have no idea, but that's there, which is interesting. Something else that's interesting is you have both the boom cylinders tucked inside the boom rather than being outside. So it's a little unusual. And you have this adjustable sliding boom here, which is not unusual. It used to be I wouldn't say a popular option, but it was an option. They still have something similar to this. You see it on a lot of rubber tire excavators where you just have a knuckle here and another cylinder, so that if you're digging somewhere really tight, you can basically adjust the pitch of the boom. So you can, it helps you dig in much tighter quarters. It gives you much better use of the bucket, I guess you could say. And that's kind of what the idea was here, but you just had to unpin it and slide it yourself, which I can't imagine would have been either easy or enjoyable to do. It doesn't seem very practical to me. And I can't imagine many times where you would have stopped and taken the effort to slide the boom in or out. I wouldn't ever want to do it. Now, if you look in the cab here, you'll see that there is nothing. I mean, just nothing in there. And that's kind of odd, especially coming from NZG. Another thing that's odd is, if you look at the stick here, that is as far as it comes in. That's where it stops. Now, if you stretch it out, gets pretty straight, so I mean that's good, but that's as far in as it comes, and that's about terrible. And the bucket range of motion isn't very good either. It dumps a little bit and it curls a little bit, but just nothing nothing very good. And the boom angles aren't very good either. You get a little bit of a digging depth, and you give a little bit of a I guess you call that a tip height, I really don't know. But it's just not great. And again, that's interesting coming from NZG, because usually they do a better job than this. So it's just kind of it's fascinating. Like, what went so wrong with this excavator that they got right on other models? You know, the Lee Bears aren't this bad. The O&Ks aren't this bad. The the cats aren't this bad. It's just interesting. Anyway, that's about all I have for this. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask. If you do know who actually made this Massey Ferguson excavator, please let me know. I'm pretty curious. Otherwise, thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more of what we have, please subscribe to Maryland Construction Diecast.